So I'm here to give a very brief talk about why we think digital ownership is important and the dream of digital ownership, which those of you who have followed us, you would know much about because we keep talking about it. But to understand the importance, let's talk a little bit about the history of the web. So Web 1, as we all know, was the web of read. This is where information was democratized in the early days when we were basically posting things online, the platforms, the online magazines. And then came Web 2, where we were able to write to the web. But what was different about writing to the web this time was that really what we were doing is we were putting the wisdom of the crowds into the world through the internet. So whether it's sharing photos on Instagram, whether it's sharing our knowledge on Reddit or on Wikipedia or whatever that may be, we actually created basically vast amounts of knowledge and thus turned into vast amounts of data. But with one difference, that data was controlled by the platforms. And that actually is now solved with Web 3. Because in Web 3, because it's built on blockchain, we're now able to actually own a piece of that data. We're basically able to own a piece of the future internet. But when we talk to people outside, it gets confusing. Why do I need to own a piece of the internet? Why do I need to own a piece of data? Why does it matter? I'm here to tell you exactly why it's so important and how it impacts all of us and why most of you are already building in the space anyway. We live today in a world where digitally colonized. We exist in digital kingdoms. We do not own anything on Instagram. The 1 million followers you have on Instagram, you don't own those. When Facebook renamed themselves to Meta, the person who owned the @Metaverse handle on Instagram lost it for impersonating Facebook, even though Facebook just created that name. When Elon Musk most recently renamed Twitter to X, the person who owned the @X handle lost the @X handle. And he decided, oh, we want to do music on Twitter. So what did he do? The person who owned the @Music handle lost it. When Epic, the owners of Fortnite, one of the biggest game companies in the world, is unable to launch the app on the App Store, what does it tell us? We are completely digital dependents. But there is one issue. We exist online. Most of us here, especially in this room, spend all of our time online. If we are not online, imagine our life. We would have no digital existence. We would not be able to make friends. We probably couldn't conduct business, meaning that we are actually serfs to these digital platforms. But we create vast amounts of data. And in these data, that's why we have ChatGPT. That's why we have self-driving cars. That's why we have all the things that we see today in the online worlds. But we don't own any of that. And that's why those who control the data are the most powerful companies in the world today. And that's why digital ownership is so important. One other thing about digital ownership is about us as humans, as individuals. Why does ownership matter to us? I give this example in some talks about, for those who don't understand the difference between NFTs and assets. They struggle with this idea that an NFT would be more expensive than this Birkin bag, which is a real bag and you can carry it around. But how many people actually buy this bag so they can actually put something in it? Most people buy a watch. How many people buy a Rolex to tell the time? Or how many people really buy a Lamborghini so they can really just drive it from point A to point B? The reason we purchase these things have a lot more to do with culture and community and network effects that mean stuff to us. If we only buy things for utility, then we would only be wearing exactly the same things. We should only be wearing black and we should all be wearing the same shoes. But we decide to buy these different things because they mean something to our identity. We do this in the real world. And now in the digital world, we can now do this. And in gaming, $100 billion is spent on virtual goods that are rented. This is now something that we can actually own in Web 3. And this business effect, which later on you'll hear a little bit more about Seb on Sandbox, for instance, can already be seen today. Whether you buy virtual land, whether you basically own the rights to your NFTs, where people are building today, close to 1,000 companies have essentially used their Bored Apes to create businesses, from restaurants to coffee shops to bars to whiskeys to games and all that type of stuff. And what it really means in the world of Web3 is that we're basically shifting from an environment where we don't own anything in the network, where we now get to own a stake in the very networks that we participate. Imagine, for instance, every time we shared a photo on Instagram, we would receive a small token or a small NFT to represent the stake of value that you delivered, as opposed to simply receiving nothing for it. Which means that in this future Web3, all of us become effectively a kind of owner of the networks that we construct. which later on I think you'll hear a little bit about from other people. Now, in closing, why is digital property rights so important? Because we think of the open metaverse essentially as nation economies. So, in the physical world, all countries that have property rights, such as UAE, such as US, UK, Hong Kong, you have high GDPs, high income, and of course, correlated more higher freedoms. Every country that has no to low property rights has very low freedoms, has very low income, has very low GDPs. On the extreme side, think of countries like North Korea, for instance. And I would say that in the Web 2 world, we are in a low property rights world. We don't own anything, which is why our time and attention online is worth only cents on the dollar. Why should our time online be only worth 1 or 2 cents or 5 cents from an advertising standpoint, as an example? It's because we have low property rights. We don't have the ability to create this kind of capital formation. In Web 3, that's changed. And I want to give you one example just before I close. Last year, in a pretty bad bear market with FTX and 3 Arrows and all these fun events that we had last year, we went through a lot in our space, as I know all of you commiserate equally. NFTs still did $24 billion in sales. And there's only really a few million people who are basically buying, trading, and selling these NFTs. But what's important is not the $24 billion, which is not a bad number. It roughly represents a bit more than 10% of the gaming industry today. What's important is that 90% of the value of these NFTs went to creators and owners of these NFTs. That meant close to $20+ billion went to participants in the ecosystem, to the stakeholders of Web3. In comparison, Spotify, which is the largest music platform in the world, serving 8 to 9 million creators and over hundreds of millions of users, only paid out less than $8 billion in that same year. This is the example of what happens when you have property rights versus when you don't have property rights. When you have property rights, not only do you have correlated more freedoms, you also have capital formation. If you didn't own your house, you can't get a mortgage. If you don't own your assets, you wouldn't invest in it. Imagine if you built a business and you would know you could lose it next year. Why would you invest and make a 5 or 10-year business plan? The fact that you can invest long-term is the reason why property rights benefits us long-term as well. So I'll conclude with this thought. It's a famous one from George Washington. He famously said, freedom and property rights are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. And the same is true for our digital freedoms. We must have digital property rights in order to have true digital freedom. Thank you.